Hey everybody, how are we doing? I am Ben Griffith, and this is the Ben Griffith Breakdown. So, in today's episode, we are going to be talking about these court decisions, and I guess state secretary of state decisions in Colorado and Maine, where Trump has been disqualified from the ballot there. And want to go over a few things. So, just kind of what's happened so far, how it happened, what premise this is being argued on, the constitutionality of it, the arguments against it, the due process concerns that have come up with it, and the inevitable move for this to go to the Supreme Court of the United States, and kind of how I think that's going to play out. So, let's get into it. First and foremost, for those of you who haven't followed this closely, Colorado and Maine have now disqualified Trump from being on the ballot for the GOP Republican primary. So I want to make sure that we get that straight. So some people think that he's been thrown off the ballot to be president for the presidential election, but he hasn't even become the nominee yet. So he can't obviously be thrown off for that. But what I will say is if they were able to somehow throw him off the ballot for the GOP primary and get away with it, then he would, by default, they would be able to throw him off the presidential ballot. So one does kind of lead to the other. And so in what happened in these two states were the Colorado Supreme Court decided 4-3. So just, almost right down the middle, that Trump should be kicked off the ballot in Colorado. In Maine, the Secretary of State, Shenna Bellows, unilaterally decided, I guess she has that right in Maine, that Trump should not be able to be allowed on the ticket. So the reason that these two states are currently in the news are because they have successfully disqualified Trump from being on the ballot. There are multiple other states that have already gone through it and decided to allow him on the ballot, and then some that are still in the process. So Florida, Michigan, Minnesota, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island all have heard the cases and decided in their courts that that is ridiculous and it's been dismissed. Arizona, Alaska, Nevada, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, Oregon, South Carolina, Texas, Vermont, Virginia, West Virginia, Wisconsin, and Wyoming all have lawsuits that are being pushed inside of their courts there. I believe many of those are going to be dismissed. But what's going to happen here, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, is this is inevitably going to go to the Supreme Court. I believe it's going to be struck down in the Supreme Court overwhelmingly. So one of these, probably Colorado, will go to the Supreme Court. And as that's decided, will also, by precedent, be decided for all of the other states at the same time. So some of them might just be waiting for that to come down before they even push it up the stack. So what is prompting this? So the 14th Amendment, the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, calls out the inability to hold specific offices if you were part of an insurrection. It goes all the way back to the Civil War. They put this thing in there, basically if you've tried to overthrow the government or, took part in or aided and abetted in any sort of an insurrection towards the government, you are no longer allowed to run for office. The problem with this section is it is very ambiguous. What I mean by that is it calls out specifically senators, congressmen, electors for the vice president and president, people holding civil and military positions, that sort of thing. But it calls out officers of the United States, but does not specifically call out the presidency. So there are people who argue that the founders specifically left out the president. There are people who argue that officers of the United States includes the president. So there's a lot of interpretation and, again, ambiguity there that's being kind of gone back and forth over there. So there are a number of issues with these decisions. So in Colorado, and I guess, and in Maine, they both went ahead and decided in one case. They took one case to remove him from the ballot, and they made a number of decisions within that case outside of removing him from the ballot. They decided what the interpretation of the 14th Amendment was, and single-handedly decided that an officer of the United States did, in fact, mean the president. They also then decided that Donald Trump was guilty of a crime, which you cannot decide the guilt of somebody inside of a secondary decision. Without due process. Somebody can only be convicted of a crime, and then you can decide on that crime if they were convicted of it through due process. You can't just say in the middle of a different decision, we believe this person is guilty of a crime and therefore cannot hold office. And then, based on those two things, then decided to disenfranchise the entire Republican voting base inside of Colorado and Maine, based on their interpretation and their basically manufacture of a crime. The biggest thing here is that guilt of a crime without due process. These judges and this Secretary of State just said, we believe that Donald Trump is guilty of a crime and therefore should not be able to hold office. That's not how this works. Somebody has to be convicted of a crime through due process, and then those judges can say, based on the fact that that person was convicted of this crime and was found guilty in our judicial system, they are no longer allowed to hold this office or be on this ballot based on on this decision. And an example of that would be if Casey Anthony, right, decided she wanted to become the governor of Florida. Casey Anthony legally could run for office and hold office in the state of Florida. She could be a congresswoman for the state of Florida, and nobody could stop that. A judge couldn't say, listen, we all know Casey Anthony killed her kid and she's a murderer, and because of that, we are going to remove her from the ticket. You can't do that. Casey Anthony we all believe she killed her kid, but it doesn't matter. She was never convicted of a crime and therefore can still hold any office anywhere, regardless of what we're all pretty sure she did. And that's, kind of the comparison there, the analogy, what I'm looking for. And these judges in this Secretary of State stepped way, way outside the purview of what they are supposed to be doing here. And as bad as Colorado is, it was a panel of judges, and 4 of them at least decided to go that way. And it was, a majority rule there. But Maine is even worse because it was one woman. Shenna Bellows just decided unilaterally that she thinks Donald Trump committed a crime, how she is interpreting the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment on her own, and that an entire voting block of that state should be completely disenfranchised, and that the vote should not land in the hands of the people and let them decide what they think about Donald Trump. And if you're really that set on it, then make your case. Make your case to the voters of Maine on why you don't think Donald Trump should be on the ballot, why you don't think he should be the GOP nominee, and let the people decide. But you do not get to unilaterally remove the voting rights of an entire block of people based on your, ambiguous decision, your arbitrary decision on who should or should not be on the ballot. So it's a complete violation of the office, and it's political recklessness. So the ramifications of this are going to be, it could be, if this was allowed to stand, far-reaching. If we get to a point in this country where candidates are being picked by judges and secretary of states based on these arbitrary interpretations of the Constitution and manufactured guilt without due process, our democracy it's vapor. It's gone. And it doesn't just affect Maine and Colorado when you're talking about these. There's already a lot of distrust in the system. And if you start just removing people from ballots on different states, right now, Colorado and Maine might not make that big of a difference because Joe Biden would probably win Maine anyway, and he might win Colorado, and Trump could possibly win the election without Colorado. But what if you took away Ohio, North Carolina, and Florida and removed Trump or Biden, for that matter, from those states? The election's all but over at that point. If you win those states, historically, you win. So this doesn't just affect, it doesn't just disenfranchise the people of Colorado and Maine, but if you allow this to, spread, it will disenfranchise hundreds of millions of voters throughout the United States, because it doesn't matter how you vote in South Carolina or Texas or California or whatever. You've already lost the election before it started because you allowed political activists to remove people from the voting rolls, from the ballot. So again, there's already a lot of mistrust with the system. There are people who believe that the judicial system is actively working to interfere with an election, and this does not help at all, and it's just bad overall for the perception of democracy. Now, the good news is this will inevitably go to the Supreme Court. It will, I'll bet anything I own, and you have it on tape, this will be overturned by the United States Supreme Court. It'll probably be overturned 9-0, maybe 8-1, but it will be an overwhelming, repudiation of these cases, and all the rest will get knocked down too. So again, the reason for that is that the Supreme Court is going to see that this was a blatantly outside the purview of what these people are supposed to be doing, and the way that they decided it was completely unconstitutional and completely unjust. So it's going to go to the Supreme Court, and it's going to get shut down, but it's that the damage is already done, because now the fact that these people did this just, I guess, points to the fact that before there was some speculation about judicial activism and, people of power actively trying to interfere with an election, but now it's blatant. I mean, this was just egregious at every level. So it adds a new layer to that distrust. So, as you're watching the news and watching these talking heads and these political strategists try to argue this as just, trying to make it be subjective, I can assure you there's nothing subjective about these rulings. These are objectively wrong. It should have never happened. And what they'll argue is Donald Trump is he's a threat to democracy, and we have to do anything we can to prevent him from being president again. And whatever we have to do, the ends justify the means. This is not saving democracy in any way. It is destroying democracy. And when it comes to the Constitution of the United States and the sacred right of the American people to vote, the ends will never, ever, ever justify the means. And I'll say this, and anybody who knows me personally knows that I am no fan of Donald Trump. I would vote for basically any other GOP candidate in the primary other than Donald Trump. However, there are a large voting bloc, if you've seen the polls, who want to vote for Donald Trump, and those people have a right to vote for him. They have a right to have their voice heard. And if he becomes the nominee, he becomes the nominee. But if he shouldn't not become the nominee because people believe that he's, the Antichrist or whatever they want to call him. So what you're seeing again is nothing short of judicial activism, but even worse, it's judicial virtue signaling. They all know, all these people know this isn't going to stick. They know what they're doing is unconstitutional and it's, judicially irresponsible, but they don't care. They want to make a point, and they're doing it with the powers of their position. And that goes beyond, it goes beyond incompetent or negligent. It's corrupt at best and tyrannous at worst. It should be concerning to every single person in this country, whether you're a fan of Trump or not. And again, I'm no fan of Trump, but it should concern you because even though it'll be struck down at the Supreme Court, the fact that people are willing to abuse their power at that level is beyond terrifying. And there should be some sort of ramifications for abusing your power like that. The Colorado has a Colorado Commission of Judicial Discipline or something like that can go and look at the decisions of judges and reprimand them, even remove them from office. And when you have a finding that was 4-3 and it goes to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court knocks it down 9-0, which I believe possibly could happen, there should be a review of that, right? And a Secretary of State who makes a unilateral decision to remove somebody from the ballot, and once again disenfranchises that's level of a voting block, that person should be impeached. These are egregious misuses of power that cannot go. It can't go without some sort of, repercussions, some sort of reaction to it. So I'm hoping again that something is done about it down the road. And I believe that, again, the Supreme Court is going to knock this down and it's just going to go away. But the realization of this is what people are worried about. People are worried about the fact that there are people at this level of power that are willing to misuse that power in a way where they're not even trying to hide it anymore. They know for a fact that what they're doing is wrong and it's against the Constitution, but they're like, it doesn't matter because Trump is bad for the country and I'm going to make a stand here and, do whatever I can, regardless of right or wrong, to make that happen. So this is going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out and see if there is any, fallout from this. I think that you'll probably see, candidates campaigning on it. And you're seeing even, New York Times is saying this shouldn't be happening. Democrats in Congress, in the Senate, coming out and saying, this is completely irresponsible. Every single other candidate on the GOP trail, including Chris Christie, who has been, to say he's been critical of Trump would be the understatement of the century, has come out and said this is unbelievably irresponsible by these people and should not be happening, etc. So, guys, this is going to be an ongoing thing that we're going to follow. I'll probably end up doing another video on this at some point, and we'll walk through it. But I think it's, again, important to understand that basically these people don't have the rights to make these decisions in the way that they did. And if people start getting away with these types of things, it could really lead to the downfall of our democracy, but more importantly, the perception of our democracy. And if you have, over 50% of the people in this country believing that we're not a democracy anymore and we've become an autocracy, and their vote simply doesn't count anymore because people of power can just come and strip their right to vote away or strip their right to vote for a certain candidate away, that is going to lead again to the perception that we don't have a democracy anymore. And when you have that, when you have a breakdown of democracy, you will see a breakdown of society. And when you get to a point where that large of a amount of the electorate believes that, bad things are going to happen. You will inevitably see something that is exponentially worse than January 6th. And I don't want anyone to think I'm advocating for that. I am not, but it is simply the truth. You cannot have that many people be disenfranchised and think that they don't matter to the system anymore and not have some sort of a negative outcome from that. So, guys, I'll leave it there. Once again, questions, comments below, and I'll try to get to as many as possible. And we'll probably do another video on this at some point because I think there's going to be some more fallout from this, and we will go from there, guys. Thanks a lot, and I'll talk to you guys soon.